There are global concerns over gas prices around the world as the Russian invasion of Ukraine continues. Crude oil barrel costs are reaching highs not seen in years. To help address the problem, member countries of the International Energy Agency plan to release 60 million barrels of oil from reserves. Steven Mufson is a reporter covering the business of climate change for the Washington Post. He's been tracking the story and is with us now to discuss. So, Steven, let's talk about first, how is this war in Ukraine affecting gas supply routes?
Well, it's not affecting them too much. There are two important gas lines that go through Ukraine and onward to the rest of Europe. So those are the lines that are of major concern. I don't think they've been disrupted yet, but that could easily happen in the coming days.
But now the U.S. and other oil-producing nations are preparing for that, though, and they're talking about using these strategic oil reserves. Can you talk about, what the White House is planning to do and others to combat the possibility of rising fuel prices, rising above what they are now?
Yeah, well, the release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was an effort to try to bring down prices and to soften the effect of the war in Ukraine. It's only partially working because 60 million barrels is kind of a drop in the bucket in the global oil and gas markets. And so, we have to see where things go. I mean, that's what the major concern is about at this point, is about a possible disruption of Russia's oil exports, which are extremely large. It produces 10.4 million barrels a day. It's about 10% of the world's total production. And so disrupting that would definitely have an even bigger impact than the sanctions have had so far.
But Steven, help our audience understand. I mean, the United States imports less than, I think I saw Lindsey Graham on CBS Morning saying this morning that we import less than 5% of our oil from Russia. There have been calls for the president of the United States, and some of them have been bipartisan, to crack down on Russia, either by banning Russian oil to the United States or outright sanctioning them, which would affect a lot of people in other countries around the world. There is a difference between the banning and the sanctioning of Putin's oil. So the president is stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, he's got this very bold climate change plan that he wants to try and implement. And on the other, he's being asked by Republicans and some Democrats to ban oil exports, which would drive the costs up, and to increase production of oil in the United States. But if we don't import that much oil from Russia, why would we need to do that?
Well, so the oil market is one big bathtub of oil. And, you take it out one place, it has an effect everywhere. So the United States imports very little. 6% would be, I think, even a little high. But if Russian oil exports are disrupted worldwide, and if that has a big impact in Europe, that ripples through everywhere, and the price goes up everywhere. We see that this morning. The price of crude oils went up over $115 a barrel.
You talked about how these 60 billion barrels, 60 million rather, just a drop in the bucket, 2 million extra barrels for the next 30 days. And what I found really interesting about your article is it almost seemed like this was an attempt to ease people's concerns, because the reality of it is it's difficult to determine what the impact of that would be.
But I think
part of the reason is we also don't know what OPEC Plus will do.
Right.
And what we know right now is they are staying the course, and they have no plan to increase production radically. So can we talk about this sort of other factor, the X factor of OPEC Plus?
Yeah, OPEC Plus is extremely important. And they decided to increase production only 400,000 barrels a day. That's the amount that they said they would increase it by a year ago. And so not much help for the Biden administration coming out of OPEC. There are only two countries really in OPEC that could make a big difference. One is Saudi Arabia, which could easily boost production by 2 million barrels a day. And the other is the United Arab Emirates, which could add another 1 million barrels a day or so. One of the interesting aspects of all this is that if there's a deal with Iran, that could lead to an increase in oil production out of Iran of maybe 1 to 1.5 million barrels a day. But, if you add up all of that together, it doesn't come to Russia's oil exports. If we're talking, some people have been talking about let's stop all of Russia's oil exports. Well, I think it's important just to keep in mind what that means. They're exporting 5.5 million barrels a day of crude, another 2.5 million barrels a day of refined products. So 7.5, you add up Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran combined, and you don't get there. So I think that's why the administration is treading very carefully over this question of, do you want to sanction Russian oil exports? Because that's going to have an even bigger impact and even bigger increase in prices than what we've seen so far.
Yeah,
I just want to remind people that one of the pluses in OPEC Plus is Russia.
No.
So they're obviously not going to vote against their best interests.
For sure. But
that's a hugely important point. OPEC was really only 10 countries, and now they've brought in all these others. And the two key players are Russia and Saudi Arabia.
But it's important also and Stephen, you raise an excellent point, which is that if the United States, if President Biden chooses to sanction or ban oil production and the importation of oil here in the United States from Russia, it can have far-reaching implications that we're not aware of yet, because Putin has put his nuclear forces on alert. No one wants a nuclear war. That's why the United States is saying we're not putting boots on the ground. But that may not be what triggers Putin. It may be something like this, where he's fighting for the essential survival of his country. Let's remember that Japan attacked the United States because we embargoed their oil in the 1940s, and look what that decision led to. Yeah. So I think it's an important one. And a lot of it is also political, because if you do that and gas prices go up, Republicans can say to the president, look, you're responsible for the pain Americans are feeling at the pump.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one thing to keep in mind is also, with all the other economic sanctions that are in place, that a lot of people are reluctant to do business, even if it's for oil. So I think there are a lot of traders out there who would ordinarily be buying Russian oil, who right now are holding back a little bit, see how all this shakes out.
Steven Mufson, a great article, and thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.